Okay, so imagine this, right? You've been waiting 15 years to find out what happened to your daughter, and then boom, the answer just pops up in the most unexpected place.
Wow, that's got to be tough.
It is, and that's exactly what we're diving into today, the Christy Wilson case.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be using the Anatomy of Murder podcast episode as our main source.
Okay, I've heard of that one.
Yeah, it's a good one. So, for those who don't know, Christy was this young woman working in, I think it was tech,
Right, yeah.
and she just vanishes after a visit to a casino. They find her car, but no Christy.
Yeah, a real mystery.
Total mystery. And at first, they think maybe it's her ex-boyfriend. Yeah, they had a bit of a rocky past.
Ah, I see.
But then things take a turn, and this guy, Mario Garcia, who was the last person to see her, he becomes the main suspect.
This case is, well, what I find so fascinating about it is how it shows you like the darkest parts of what people can do, but also how strong people can be, when they're faced with something so awful.
Right.
And it really gets into the whole thing about nobody homicide cases. Those are super hard to prove.
Yeah, because you don't have, like, the most obvious piece of evidence.
Exactly. So you have to rely on like little bits of evidence, what witnesses say, and all that forensic stuff. It's like trying to put together a puzzle, but you're missing a bunch of pieces.
And speaking of those little pieces, there's this crazy moment in the podcast where Christy's mom, Debbie, she overhears the police talking.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, and they're basically saying they think it's a homicide, but they haven't even told her yet.
Oh, wow. Talk about adding insult to injury.
It's a total shock for her, but you know what? It kind of lights a fire under her.
Hmm.
She goes from this quiet person to, like, a total force to be reckoned with.
It's amazing how like something so tragic can completely change someone, like bring out the strength they never knew they had.
Totally. And Debbie's a perfect example of that. She goes from shy to this fierce advocate, demanding answers, pushing the investigation forward.
Makes you think, we all have that potential inside us.
For sure. But, okay, so the police are on the homicide track now, but they don't exactly handle things perfectly.
What do you mean?
Well, they release this surveillance footage of Christy at the casino to the media.
Okay.
They do it before even telling her family.
Oh, come on. That's just wrong.
Huge blunder. Debbie's understandably furious. I mean,
Yeah.
talk about a breach of trust.
You can't just do that to a family that's already going through so much.
Right. But here's the thing. It actually becomes a turning point.
Really? How so?
Well, because Debbie confronts them. She holds them accountable, demands better communication. And I think it forces them to take her seriously.
So it's like, in a weird way, this awful thing actually makes the police work more closely with Debbie.
Exactly. They give her a dedicated investigator who keeps her in the loop. They start working as a team,
It shows you how sometimes you have to like push back against the system to get what you need.
And it emphasizes the importance of having someone on your side who understands what you're going through. All right, so let's get back to the investigation. Remember that surveillance footage? Well, turns out Christy wasn't alone at the casino. She's with this Mario Garcia guy.
Oh, right. The suspect.
Yeah, and the evidence against him starts piling up. His statements don't add up. He's got scratches on him that he can't really explain.
Suspicious.
And then they find a gun in his house.
Wait, a gun? Was that like a big deal?
Big deal, because he wasn't supposed to have one. He was a convicted felon.
Whoa, hold on. So this guy's got a past.
Oh, yeah. And it's pretty disturbing. He'd assaulted an ex-girlfriend, even threatened her with a gun.
Jeez.
And get this, there was this other incident, even eerier, where another girlfriend of his and her mother drowned. And he was the only one who survived.
No way. Seriously.
There's a pattern that screams red flag.
You gotta wonder, what if they had looked into this guy's history sooner?
Chilling thought, right? But thankfully, they do find out about his past. And then they search his car. Remember, he said he and Christy split up after the casino.
Right, right.
But the car tells a different story. They find one of Christy's hairs stuck in the door handle.
Oh, that's not good for him.
Not at all. And then, boom, they find her DNA in the backseat and the trunk.
That's pretty damning evidence.
It was the proof they needed. They had his lies, and now they had physical evidence connecting Christy to his car.
So what happened then? Did they arrest him?
Yep. 3 weeks after Christy disappeared, Mario Garcia is charged with her murder.
That must have been a huge relief for Debbie and her family.
Absolutely. But remember, it's still a nobody homicide case.
Right, which means it's not over yet.
Not by a long shot. Can you explain why those types of cases are so tricky?
Sure. It's like, imagine you're trying to convince someone that something happened, but you don't have the most important piece to show them.
The actual victim.
Exactly. You got to rely on all these other things to tell the story, and you got to be super convincing because there's always that doubt.
And through all of this, Debbie's there every step of the way. Every hearing, every meeting, she's pushing for answers, making sure Christy isn't forgotten.
That takes incredible strength.
It really does. It shows you the power of, like, a mother's love and determination. So let's get into the trial itself. What were some of the big moments that led to Garcia being convicted?
Well, the prosecution, they laid everything out so carefully. They had his inconsistent stories, those scratches and bruises, and that DNA evidence.
That sounds like an open and shut case.
It does, right?
Hmm.
But they also found something really interesting.
What's that?
His internet search history.
Oh, what was he searching for?
Just a few days after Christy went missing, he looked up information about the date rape drug on this toxicology website.
Seriously?
Yeah, specifically how long it stays in your system.
That's creepy.
Super creepy. And Debbie had mentioned that Christy seemed like off in the surveillance footage, almost like she wasn't herself.
Oh, wow. I didn't catch that.
So they couldn't prove he actually used the drug, but it definitely painted a picture of his motive and planning.
Like he knew what he was doing.
Exactly. Okay, so the prosecution has a strong case. What did the defense do?
They kind of jumped around,
Okay.
At times they tried to blame Christy's ex-boyfriend, bringing up their fights.
Trying to create reasonable doubt.
Exactly. Then they tried to say the DNA evidence was messed with, even accused Debbie's husband, who used to be in law enforcement, of tampering with it.
Oh, come on, that's low.
Totally desperate. Did the jury buy any of it?
Nope. After about 12 hours, they came back with a guilty verdict. Mario Garcia was convicted of murdering Christy Wilson.
Justice served, finally.
But even with the conviction, there's still this huge question hanging in the air. Where is Christy?
And that's where our deep dive takes a whole new turn. We go from the courtroom to this intense battle between Debbie and Mario Garcia.
It's like a whole new chapter filled with tough choices, ethical dilemmas, and eventually some long-awaited answers.
Sounds like we're just getting to the good part. But before we jump into that, we need to take a quick pause. So we left off with Garcia being convicted, but yeah, like you said, the big question was still out there. Where was Christy?
And that's the thing with these nobody cases. They just leave the families hanging, no real closure.
It's gotta be so hard. So what did Debbie do? Did she ever give up hope of finding her daughter?
Not a chance. If anything, she became even more determined. Like every time they found any remains anywhere, she was on it, checking with the investigators.
Man, I can't even imagine. Living with that constant hope, but also the fear of disappointment.
Yeah, it must have been incredibly tough. But she had some really good people around her.
Ooh, the investigators.
Yeah, Nuno and Murch. They really stuck with it, even called her just to see how she was doing.
Sometimes it's those little things that make a difference.
Totally. It reminds you that you're not alone, even when you're dealing with something so awful.
Right. And it probably helped Debbie keep believing that Christy would be found, that justice would, win out in the end.
And then a couple of years after the trial, Nuno and Murch, they approached Debbie with a pretty unusual request.
Okay, now I'm curious. What did they ask her?
They were teaching this course on homicide investigation, and they wanted Debbie to help them with a specific part of it.
What, like guest lecturing?
Yeah, on the topic of working with families of victims.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. From grieving mom to, teacher sharing her experience.
It really shows how strong she was and how much she wanted to use her experience to, make things better.
To maybe prevent other families from going through what she went through.
Exactly. She realized that she could give these investigators, a real understanding of what families go through in these situations.
Turn pain into purpose,
Mm.
So she's teaching, but she never stopped searching for Christy. Anything else happened during those years?
Well, in 2017, Debbie agreed to do this news interview about the case. And this is where things get interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
She knew that Garcia was on social media, even from prison.
No way. Can they do that?
Apparently. Anyway, Debbie used this interview as a way to get a message to him.
Smart move. What did she say?
She said very publicly that she'd like to speak with Mario Garcia before she died.
Bold move.
Yeah.
And did it work?
It did. A few weeks later, she got a letter from him.
Whoa. Did he confess? Did he tell her where Christy was?
Not exactly, but it was close. He kind of admitted to killing Christy and said he regretted it.
Like he wished he'd been somewhere else that night.
Yeah, like he was trying to show remorse.
So frustrating. Gives you a little glimpse into his mind, but still no answers for Debbie.
Right. It's like taking one step forward and two steps back. Debbie decided not to reply, trying to keep some control over the situation.
I get it. But of course, Garcia didn't stop there.
Note, he sent another letter, this time asking for a compassionate release from prison, said he had some health problems.
Wait, seriously? A compassionate release for a murderer? Did he really think that would fly?
Probably not, but he was desperate, and it put Debbie in a really tough spot.
Oh man, I bet. Like, does she try to use this to get information about Christy, even if it means this guy might get out of prison?
Exactly. It's a huge moral dilemma.
You're talking about negotiating with the person who took your daughter, potentially giving him freedom just for a chance at finding her.
It's heavy stuff. And after a lot of thinking, talking with Muno and Murch, Debbie agreed to consider it.
So, was there a deal on the table? Did Garcia finally spill the beans?
Not quite. The DA's office started talking to Garcia, trying to figure out if he was sincere, But then a new DA came in.
Oh, so a change in leadership.
Yeah, and this new DA was totally against any deals with a convicted murderer. He basically left it up to Debbie.
Talk about pressure. What did she decide?
She made a really tough call. She told the DA to tell Garcia no.
Wow. She basically said, I'm done playing your games.
Yeah. She couldn't compromise her values, She couldn't disrespect Christy's memory by making a deal with this guy.
Even though it meant she might never find out what happened.
It must have been agonizing, but she knew it was the right thing to do. She had to trust that fate would, work things out, that Christy would be found if it was meant to be. And then years later, something happened in one of her classes that changed everything.
Okay, you've got my attention now. What happened in the class?
Debbie was teaching her usual bit on working with victims' families, and one of the students asked this question, something nobody had ever asked her before.
What was it?
If your daughter were ever found, how would you want to be notified?
After 15 years, that question must have hit her like a ton of bricks.
It did. It forced her to think about something she maybe hadn't wanted to think about. What if Christy was found? And how would she handle that news? Her answer surprised even herself.
What'd she say?
She told them, please don't call me on the phone.
Wow. After all those years of phone calls, updates, waiting, she wanted something different.
She wanted something more personal, more real, and it sparked something in her. Later, on her flight home, it hit her. She wanted to see it with her own eyes.
She wanted face-to-face confirmation, not just a phone call.
Exactly. And 6 weeks later, there's a knock on her door. It's Nuno, Murch, and another investigator.
No way.
They flew all the way to Arizona to tell her they found Christy.
Oh my God. After all those years, it finally happened.
It did. And guess where they found her?
I don't even want to guess.
Mario Garcia's former backyard. The same place where his son had seen him doing something weird with a tractor right after Christy disappeared.
Seriously. It's like something out of a movie.
I know, right? And it shows how those investigators never really gave up. They went back and talked to Garcia's sons again, and that's what led them to the backyard.
So how did they actually find her remains after all this time?
They used this technology called ground-penetrating radar. It basically lets you see what's underground without digging.
That's incredible. Like, how does that even work?
It uses radio waves or something. Anyway, they searched a few spots with no luck, and then on the third try, bam, they hit something. A bone.
I'm getting chills just hearing this.
And then they used rapid DNA testing and dental records, and it was confirmed. The remains were Christy's.
I can't imagine what Debbie must have felt in that moment.
Relief, grief, anger. It must have been overwhelming, but she finally had her daughter back.
What about Garcia? Did he get in any more trouble for hiding her body all those years?
Sadly, no. He was already serving life, so there weren't any extra charges.
That's kind of messed up. You think there should be some consequence for making a family suffer even longer?
A lot of people feel that way. But in this case, the focus shifted to, honoring Christy and finding some kind of peace.
I bet it felt like a huge weight lifted off Debbie's shoulders, finally bringing Christy home.
It was. She said her life feels totally different now. Like, she has peace, even though it's a bittersweet kind of peace. And she keeps Christy's memory alive every day, trying to live a life that would make her daughter proud.
That's a beautiful way to honor her. So what stands out to you the most about this case?
For me, it's got to be Debbie's, sheer resilience. She loses her daughter, the system fails her left and right, but she never gives up. It's inspiring.
It's really something, and she doesn't just, fight for justice. She turns her pain into something positive.
Right, like teaching those investigators That shows real empathy, wanting to prevent other families from going through the same thing.
Exactly. It proves that even when something terrible happens, you still have a choice in how you react.
You can let it destroy you, or you can turn it into something good, something that honors the person you lost.
Debbie's story also makes you think about, like, the ethics of it all.
Yeah, like when she considered that compassionate release for Garcia, just for a chance at finding Christy.
Tough call. A lot of people would understand that, but it opens up this whole debate about, like, is it ever okay to negotiate with someone like that?
It's a really gray area, no easy answers. But in the end, Debbie stuck to her principles. She chose what she felt was right for Christy, even if it meant she might never get the answer she wanted.
Shows incredible strength of character.
It really does. But it also makes you wonder, what happens when getting justice and finding closure, like, clash? How do you make that choice when there's no right answer?
That's a tough one, and it goes way beyond just this case. It's something we all have to figure out for ourselves.
I think what makes the Christy Wilson case so powerful is that it's about so much more than just the crime itself?
It is. It's about, like, what humans are capable of, the good and the bad. It's about grief and hope and how those things can coexist.
And there's that message from Debbie about finding peace, honoring Christy's memory, and choosing to live life to the fullest.
Even though a part of her is missing, she finds a way to keep going, to find joy in the world.
It's like a reminder that we can't control everything that happens to us, but we can control how we react? We can choose to find meaning, to keep the memory of those we've lost alive.
As we wrap up this deep dive, let's take a moment to remember Christy.
Her spirit and the incredible love that brought her home.
And let's think about what her story teaches us about strength, empathy, and how complicated it can be to find both justice and peace.
It's a case that sticks with you, makes you think about how you'd handle those kinds of challenges, and how to support others going through similar things.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you a new way to look at the Christy Wilson case, and maybe even inspired you to find your own strength when things get tough.